I thank the honourable member for Ryan. The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy
For Indi. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The honourable member for Wanno.
No,
Thanks. We might just set the clock again, I think, yes, on that one.
Please set the clock
thank you.
again, please.
Mr Deputy Speaker, I acknowledge this member for Wannon and Ryan, and thank you for your contribution. And to the young people who are listening to this debate, what we're talking about today has got direct relevance to your future, so I encourage you to have some discussion about it. There are three things that I'm going to be talking about in my speech today. I want to talk about the impact that the people of Indi have to this reforms. I want to talk about why some aspects are problematic and make some suggestions for future consideration. I acknowledge the comments of the member for Ryan and say that in many areas we have total agreement. The fundamental difference that I would like to bring to this debate is I believe that in rural and regional Australia we've already got market failure, not the case in the cities. So my contention is that the government has to do something about market failure and that one size does not fit everybody. So in May this year, following the budget, in Indi, we undertook what we called the Indi Budget Impact Tour. We had a widespread consultation with my electorate, 730 people in 1 week, and copies of this report are available from my office. Generally speaking, people supported the budget and, importantly, the role of the government to make the changes that they thought fit. However, within the whole budget, there are a number of issues which caused particular concern, and none was stronger than the reaction we got to the so-called reforms in the education sector. There were a number of specific issues that people raised with me: the impact of changes to interest rates on help loans, the deregulation of the university fee system, cuts in funding, the scholarship system, increases in costs for postgraduate degrees, reliance on the market to drive changes, and the separation of teaching from research. And I'd like to read into the Hansard a summary of the major comments that people made. The possibility of increasing university fees is overwhelmingly and emotionally opposed. The proposed changes to university fee arrangements will benefit the well-off and in the future exclude the disadvantaged and country students. The expense of university study and living away from home is already too great for country students. It should be reduced, not increased. We are creating an academic underclass when we don't support rural kids to do higher education. HECS, help debt, is already a stress. Increasing it will result in less people doing higher education. Private school bias is squeezing public schools, and the Gonski proposals to redress disadvantage should be implemented. TAFE and universities need to receive more funding, and education is our future, and paying of the national debt is not so urgent. Many more comments were included. Mr Deputy Speaker, from my perspective, the number of things that in this legislation are problematic, and I'd like to outline to the House why I think there has been such a strong negative reaction. But I have to say that the people of Indi are by their natures doers. Typically they're resilient, independent and creative people who cope with change. And like most people in this House, they value education. They see it as a fundamentally important part of our social, economic and cultural infrastructure. And they see education as the answer. They see it as the solution to continuing to be a profitable, prosperous, sustainable and creative community, which is alive with opportunities for everybody. They know that the rural economy is changing. They see globalisation of our economy, and through their agriculture and related businesses, many are active players in this internationalisation. And they know that education, especially formal education, is an absolutely essential ingredient of our ability to compete in world markets. And I know these sentiments are shared by members of this House. So what makes for such a strong negative reaction to this legislation from the people of Indi? I believe that they understand that the assumption underpinning the legislation that the market will deliver is flawed. Two recently released reports highlight the significance of regional universities in local communities, and I'll just refer to them in Hansard: Regional Universities Network, Engaging with Regions, Building a Stronger Nation, and Aspirations and Destinations of Young People, a study of 4 central Hume towns and communities by the University of Ballarat in December 2012. And as part of these reports, some very revealing statistics are presented. For Hume region, which includes half of my electorate of Indi and half of the electorate of Murray, it's northeastern and central Victoria, the percentage of graduating secondary students who enrol in a bachelor's degree. For females in Hume, 31%, for males, 26%, and it's the lowest percentage of non-metropolitan region. Interestingly, in Melbourne, 59.6%. So we have a comparison between Hume of 31% and Melbourne of almost 60%. The percentage of the Hume population aged between 25 and 35 with a bachelor's degree or higher is 17.35%. The state average is 30%. Estimated percentage of Hume students who have been offered university places but are deferring is 30%. And all my career teachers tell me that that is growing. So clearly the current system is not working. Clearly change is needed. That the question I put to this House is where you've got no competition, you've got limited service provision, and what's currently being provided not working, will a market-based economy work? My argument is not. I believe we have market failure in Indi, and the answer is more government intervention, not less. Market failure is considered by economists the rightful role of government to correct, and obviously classic economic theory believes there's a large role for government to play in the economy. And I'd just like to read into Hansard some of the preconditions for markets that is necessary if they're going to achieve efficiency. Clearly, I believe these do not exist in my electorate. There needs to be perfect competition. There needs to be perfect information. We need to have perfect mobility of resources. We need to have no economies of scale, and we need to have not critically large transaction costs. And it's stated that when many of these conditions fail to be met, it's termed a market failure, and it's considered by economists the rightful role of government to correct for these market failures. Obviously, classic theory leaves a large role for government to play. And this is the crux of my argument today. There is a role for government to play in the provision of education, particularly in rural and regional Australia, because there is a difference between public goods and other goods, because there is a difference between the country and the city, because education is an investment as well as an expense, and because politically we all know that one size does not fit all. And if we as politicians refuse to accept this, we will pay the costs of our decisions. So what is it about country living that makes for these special circumstances? So for my proposition, that distance is the key characteristic that needs to be accounted for, and the consequential impact that it has on population density, demographic profiles, workforce composition and skill. And these, coupled with the extra costs incurred in overcoming that tyranny of distance, the cost of money, the cost of time, the cost of resources, and particularly the cost of effort, have huge impacts for us. So people in my electorate are already paying huge costs of education, costs that are not accounted for through government. The cost of travel, accommodation, of living away from home, community disruption. And the extra costs imposed through this legislation will have a major multiplying effect. It will have a multiplying effect on the individuals concerned. It will have a multiplier effect on the families. It will have a multiplier effect on the communities, and I believe to my whole electorate. And the impacts will be even less people will take up the options of post-secondary education, and I don't think as a country we can afford it. And the fact is that even less people doing education will flow right through my community, adding to the disadvantage we already experience. So, for example, if I could briefly quote, this education I'm talking about is not about doctors and lawyers. It is not about excellence. It's about the basic provision of skilled professionals in my community. It's about nurses, it's about teachers, it's about social workers, it's about childcare workers. It's about people who do not do these jobs for maximum income. They want enough, and enough a job where they can reasonably travel from home to contribute to their community. These are not grabbing people. These are not people who want to rip the system off. They want to be able to serve their communities, earn enough income and live in their communities. The second thing, without this local provision, we will lose that whole infrastructure. The second thing is, because we do not have enough relevant education available locally, we have a huge export of our young people to the cities, and very, very few of them choose to return. That brain drain. There's an opportunity cost for my community of having to pay the loans. The money goes out of our community. So instead of being invested in businesses, in mortgages in locally, it goes off into some fund that then gets redistributed in the Netherlands. And I've already spoken in this House about my particular concern about the impact on agricultural education, so I won't go into it today. So what I would like to talk about in the next section of my speech is what can be done. We have a failure of market. We have a role for government to intervene, and we're not part of the city answer. And I can totally understand when members of parliament say it's going to work for them. Doesn't mean to say it's going to work for us. So like the people in my electorate, I am a doer, and I know the importance of outlining solutions to the problem. So talking to my community about what can be done. The community that I represent said, it's not just what we do, it's how we do it. Giving us a big hunk of money won't solve this problem. You need to talk with us, you need to engage with us. Government needs to trust us to be part of the solution. You need to build on what is already working. We need to think and plan for the long term, begin with the end in mind, and most importantly, we need to measure, count, analyse and recalibrate. It's how we do things that will deliver success. Throwing money at the problem is rarely the answer, and it won't be the answer for us. It's how the money is used that will make a difference. Suggestions from my community include, rather than limit scholarships to the profit base of universities, which clearly works to the disadvantage of rural and regional universities, have a process to consolidate scholarship funds and make them available to everybody equally. Have a process for tendering, award for best practice. Rural and regional Australia needs to be engaged in the process of developing solutions, and I'm so disappointed that this legislation was not informed by a white or green paper or a consultation process. In my community, we know that the future is not some place we're going to. We know it's one we are creating. We know the paths to it are not found but made, and we know that making of those pathways changes both the maker and the destination. And by working together with government, with community and stakeholders, we know we can come up with better solutions. Government, come and talk to us. Invest the time in consulting with your communities and working together to come up with solutions that will work. Because we know what will work. We have some excellent practice in our communities. In Wannon, I know, but in Indi specifically, we have an excellent campus of La Trobe at Wodonga, doing fantastic work in delivering against all odds to raise those statistics that I mentioned before. In Wangaratta, we have some fantastic work happening between GoTAFE and CSU delivering agricultural education. We have excellent work happening. We have models that deliver. We know what works. We know how to gauge. Give us more, not less. Begin with end in mind, government, and plan for the long term. And when I look at this legislation, I don't see a plan. I don't see how this model will address the real concerns of businesses for a skilled and experienced locally based workforce. I don't see the concerns of families who want education opportunities locally available and at all stages of the life cycle. I don't see a plan for rural and regional Australia where there is excellence. Excellence is going to be located in the cities. Where will that take us? I don't see a plan to enable communities, all communities, to reach their potential without exporting their young people. And I don't see a plan that enables a nation that is both rural and regional, to truly reach its potential. I call on the government in closing, and all my colleagues opposite who represent electorates outside the cities. In voting for this legislation, take responsibility for your decisions and start counting. Continue to count and report back to this place on where the success is and how we actually have delivered for rural and regional Australia.
I thank the honourable member for